Somewhere between the day you just lived and the sleep waiting to take you, there is a frequency. You won't find it on any dial. It doesn't broadcast on a schedule. It comes when the hour is late and the lights are low, and you are ready to go somewhere without leaving where you are. This is the midnight frequency. What follows are radio dramas, some set in the smoky, rain-soaked world of the old golden age, where private detectives walked dark streets and every shadow had a secret. Some take place closer to now, some venture further out, into times and places that haven't happened yet. All of them are original stories, written in the spirit of the programs that once kept the whole country listening in the dark. From this moment forward, there are no interruptions, no commercials, nothing to pull you back. If you found something here worth returning to, we'd be grateful for your support. The details are in the show notes, but that's for later. Right now, there is only the story. Get comfortable. Let it come.
A woman's voice on the telephone at 8 in the morning is never good news. It's either a death in the family or a husband who didn't come home. And by March of 48, I'd stopped hoping for the first one because at least a death has a date on it. Helen Decker called me on a Tuesday, and she didn't cry, which is how I knew it was bad. The criers want comfort. The quiet ones want the truth, and they've usually already guessed most of it. She said her husband Frank hadn't come home in 3 nights. Said it the way you'd report a delayed train. All the emotion sanded off so it wouldn't splinter in her hands. I asked her the question I always ask first, because it tells you more than anything else. Had this happened before? She said no. Frank Decker was not a man who wandered. He worked the Soto Street machine shop 6 days a week, came home smelling like cutting oil and cigarettes, and sat in the same chair every night reading the paper until he fell asleep in it. A creature of habit isn't a man who runs off with a woman from the Formosa Cafe. A creature of habit is a man who found something he couldn't put back down. I took the streetcar out to Boyle Heights that afternoon, past the shops with the Hebrew lettering fading into Spanish, past kids playing stickball in the gutter because nobody had fixed the streets since before the war, and Helen Decker met me at the door of a bungalow so clean it looked like it was holding its breath. She was younger than I expected. Not young, but younger than a woman ought to be to already have that particular look. The one that says she's done more waiting in her life than living. She showed me his sock drawer, because that's where she'd found it. Under the wool socks he never wore in summer. A photograph, creased down the middle, like it had lived in a breast pocket for a few years before it retired to the drawer. A young soldier, Pacific issue fatigues, squinting into a sun that wasn't in California. On the back, in pencil gone soft with age, Corby, Iwo, Feb, 45. Frank told me once he had a friend killed on that island, Helen said. A man named Corby. He doesn't talk about the war. I never pushed him on it. But 3 nights ago he came home from the shop, white as a bedsheet, and he wouldn't eat dinner. And the next morning he was gone before I woke up. And he never came home Wednesday. And he never came home Thursday, and now it's Friday. And I don't know what a dead man from 1945 has to do with my husband disappearing in 1948. But I know it's something. And I know you find things, Mr. Malone, so find him. I told her I would. It's the only thing you can promise a woman like that and mean it, because whether or not you find her husband, you will find the truth, and sometimes the truth is worse than never knowing, but it's the only currency I deal in. The Soto Street shop gave me the second thread. A co-worker named Ray Esposito, forearms like a stevedore, grease under nails that would never fully come clean again, told me Frank had gotten a phone call at the shop the week before, taken it in the front office where the boss let the men take personal calls in an emergency, and come back to the floor, looking like he'd seen the inside of his own coffin. Ray asked him what was wrong. Frank said, "Somebody I buried came back." Now, a man doesn't say a thing like that about a stranger. He says it about a debt. And a debt from February of 1945 on a volcanic rock in the Pacific is the kind of debt that doesn't go away just because you came home and got a job and married a good woman and built yourself a quiet life around not thinking about it. It took me 2 days and a friend at the county recorder's office to find a Thomas Corby registered at an address in Pasadena on a quiet street of bungalow courts near the Arroyo, the kind of street where returning men rebuilt themselves in silence because nobody wanted to hear about it anymore. The war had been over long enough that people were tired of the war, even the men who'd fought it, especially the men who'd fought it. I found him on a Saturday morning, watering a patch of tomatoes in a yard the size of a card table. A thin man with a limp, he tried to hide, and eyes that had the particular stillness of somebody who has already seen the worst thing that will ever happen to him and is simply waiting out the rest of the string. I told him my name and what I did and who had hired me, and he set down the hose without a word and asked me to sit on the step. "Frank Decker," he said, like he was testing whether the name still had teeth. I figured somebody would come looking eventually. Just took longer than I thought. He told it to me plain, the way men who've spent years rehearsing a story in their heads finally tell it once they're asked. February of 45, a ridge on Iwo Jima that didn't have a name anybody bothered to remember, just a number on a map and a lot of good men's blood in the volcanic ash. Corby and Decker were two men in the same foxhole when the position got overrun in the dark, the kind of chaos where orders stop meaning anything and it's just noise and muzzle flash and men trying not to die. Decker ran. Corby didn't have the legs for it, not with the wound he'd already taken, and he told Decker to go, and Decker went, and that was the last either of them expected to see of the other, except Corby didn't die on that ridge. The Japanese took him, and for 2.5 years, the United States government sent a folded flag and a letter of condolence to a family that was, as it turned out, mourning a man who was breaking rocks and eating rice paste at a camp outside Tokyo called Omori. Prisoners at Omori didn't get letters out. The dead don't correspond. So Frank Decker went home in 45, believing he'd left a friend to die on a hill. Carried that weight for 3 years. Built a marriage and a life on top of it. The way you build a house over a grave you hope nobody ever digs up, and never once considered that the ledger might not be closed. Corby came home in the second wave of repatriations, thin as a rail, and it took him 2 years just to stand up straight again. And when he finally had the strength to go looking for the man who'd run, it wasn't for revenge. That's the part that took me a minute to understand, because revenge is the story I'm used to. Corby didn't want blood. He wanted to be known. He wanted one person on this earth who understood exactly what those 2.5 years had cost him, and the only man who could understand it was the man who'd been there when it started. I wrote him a letter, Corby told me. Just said I was alive, and where I was, and that I didn't hold it against him because there wasn't anything to hold. He didn't answer for a week. Then he showed up at my door white as a ghost, and we sat right here on this step, and he asked me to tell him everything, every day of it. The camp, the work details, the winter of 45, when men were dying of the cold 2 a night. He didn't want the short version. He wanted the whole weight of it, like taking it onto himself was the only apology big enough. And then, I asked, then he said he was sorry, and I told him I knew, and he got up and drove off, and I haven't seen him since. That was Wednesday. I want to tell you I had some clever piece of detective work left to do, some trail of matchbooks and streetcar transfers that led me to the last chapter. I didn't. I found Frank Decker the plain way, the way you find most men who are lost without being missing. I checked the bars within walking distance of his own front door, because a man who's been carrying a thing that heavy for 3 days doesn't go far. He wants to be close to home, even when he can't make himself walk the last 4 blocks. He was on his 3rd or 4th whiskey at a place called the Aztec Room, still in his work clothes from Wednesday, 3 days of beard, staring at the mirror behind the bar like it owed him an explanation. I sat down next to him and didn't say anything for a while, because some men need the silence before they can stand the words. I left him, Frank said finally, not looking at me like he was talking to the whiskey. I'd been telling myself for 3 years that there was nothing else to do, and there wasn't. But knowing there was nothing else to do, and knowing what it cost him are 2 different animals, and I've been drinking with the second one for 3 days now. He doesn't want anything from you, I said. Not money. Not an apology even. Not really. He's already got that. He wants you to go home to your wife. Frank looked at me then, and for a second I saw the 22-year-old on that ridge instead of the 30-year-old at the bar. And he said, how do you live with a thing like that? You don't get to decide that it's over, I told him. You just get to decide whether you carry it home or leave it on a bar stool. Your wife's been carrying 3 days of not knowing, and that's a weight too, and she didn't do anything to earn it. I drove him home myself, didn't trust the whiskey to get him there straight, and didn't much trust him to walk the 4 blocks without finding another bar first. Helen Decker opened the door and didn't ask a single question, just put her arms around a man who smelled like a distillery and 3 days of not sleeping. And that, as far as I was concerned, closed the file. I never did tell her the whole story. Some of it was Frank's to tell, in his own time, in his own words. And I've learned that a good detective knows the difference between finding the truth and owning it. My job was to bring him home. What he does with the weight from here is between him and a man in Pasadena who's already forgiven him for something Frank hasn't finished forgiving himself for. That's the trouble with the war, 3 years on. It's not the bullets that follow you home. It's the debts you didn't know you still owed, and the men who come back from the dead to collect on nothing but the truth. This has been Jack Malone Investigations. The city's full of ghosts who are still breathing. Sooner or later, they all come looking to be known.
This has been the Midnight Frequency. The studio goes dark now. Sleep well.